The military police officer asked me to sit down before she told me. That's how I knew it was serious. The careful tone, the closed door, the way she positioned herself between me and the exit, like she was worried I might bolt. "There's been a situation with your family," she said. "Specifically, with property that was left to you." I was 3 weeks into boot camp, exhausted in ways I didn't know a person could be exhausted, and my brain couldn't process what she was saying. "What property?" I asked. "Your grandmother's estate," she said. "We received a call from her lawyer yesterday. It seems your stepbrother has been busy." I didn't know my grandmother had left me anything. That was the first shock. The second shock was learning that whatever she'd left was already gone. Sold, transferred, liquidated by a man I'd never trusted and apparently shouldn't have. The MP officer handed me a folder. Inside were documents I'd never seen. A will, property records, bank statements, my grandmother's final wishes, laid out in legal language, leaving me a house, a car, and an investment account worth just over $200,000. I'd been in boot camp for 21 days. In that time, my stepbrother had managed to sell all of it. I need to go back to the beginning to explain how I ended up here, sitting in an MP's office, learning about an inheritance I'd never known existed from a stranger instead of my family. My grandmother was my father's mother. I called her Nana, the way I'd called her since I was old enough to speak. She lived in a farmhouse about 40 miles outside the city where I grew up. A rambling property with a wraparound porch and a barn that hadn't held animals in decades. As a child, I spent summers there, running through fields, catching fireflies, listening to her stories about the family history that stretched back generations. She was the only adult who ever made me feel completely safe. The farmhouse had been in our family for over 100 years. My great-great-grandfather had built the original structure with his own hands, adding rooms over the decades as the family grew. The kitchen had a wood-burning stove that my grandmother still used for special occasions. The living room had a fireplace made of river stones that my great-grandfather had carried up from the creek one by one. Every corner of that house held history, held memory, held the accumulated love of generations who'd lived and died within its walls. My grandmother knew every story. She'd tell them to me on summer evenings, sitting on the porch swing while the sun went down, her voice weaving together past and present until I could almost see the people she described. My great-grandmother, who'd survived the Depression by selling eggs and vegetables from a roadside stand. My grandfather, who'd come back from the war and proposed on that very porch. The aunts and uncles and cousins who'd scattered across the country, but still thought of this house as home. "This land holds us," she told me once. "Even when we leave, it keeps a piece of us. And when we come back, we find ourselves again." I didn't fully understand what she meant then. I was 8, maybe 9, more interested in the fireflies than in philosophy. But I remembered her words. They came back to me years later, when the house was gone, and I was trying to understand what exactly had been taken from me. My parents divorced when I was 6. My father got weekends, then every other weekend. Then gradually, less and less as his new wife and her son took up more space in his life. By the time I was 12, I saw him maybe 4 times a year. By 16, we'd gone months without speaking. My grandmother never gave up on him. She called him every Sunday, sent cards on every holiday, maintained hope that her son would eventually find his way back to the person he'd been before the divorce. But she also saw clearly what I was only beginning to understand. that his new family had changed him, that his priorities had shifted, that the man who'd been my father was becoming someone I barely recognized. "Your daddy's lost right now," she told me during one of our summer visits. I was 14, angry and hurt after another canceled weekend. That woman has her hooks in him deep, but blood remembers. One day, he'll remember who he is. He never did, but my grandmother never stopped hoping. His new wife was named Gloria, and her son was named Derek. Derek was 2 years older than me, already in high school when our parents married, already established as the center of Gloria's universe. He resented sharing his mother's attention, resented sharing his new stepfather's resources, resented my existence in general. We never bonded. We barely tolerated each other. At family gatherings, the rare occasions when my father remembered I existed, Derek would make comments just quiet enough that adults couldn't hear about my clothes, my grades, my mother, my future. He had a talent for finding weak spots and pressing on them until they bruised. Derek had a way of taking things. Small things at first, a book I'd left at my father's house, a gift card from my birthday, the last piece of cake at holiday dinners. He'd deny it if confronted, and Gloria would back him up, and my father would shrug helplessly and suggest I must have misremembered. After a while, I stopped leaving anything at their house. I stopped expecting fairness. But it was more than just taking objects. Derek took attention, took space, took my father's remaining interest in being a parent. Before Gloria and Derek, my father at least tried to show up. After them, I became an afterthought, a loose end, a reminder of a life he was trying to leave behind. Gloria encouraged it. She made comments about how difficult I was, how I caused drama whenever I visited, how much easier things would be if my father could focus on his new family. She wasn't wrong that I was difficult. I was angry, and I showed it. But my anger was a response to being pushed out, and she knew exactly what she was doing. "You're never going to amount to anything," Derek told me once, when I was 15 and he was 17. "Everyone knows it. You're just taking up space." I didn't respond. I'd learned that responding only made it worse. But I remembered. I remembered everything. My grandmother saw through Derek immediately. She'd met him once at my father's second wedding and pulled me aside afterward with a warning. "That boy has hungry eyes," she said. "Watch yourself around him. And watch your father, too. He's lost his way since the divorce." I didn't fully understand what she meant then. I understand now. The last summer I spent at the farmhouse, I was 17. My grandmother was starting to slow down. Nothing obvious, just small signs that age was catching up with her. She tired more easily. She forgot names sometimes. She'd ask me the same question twice without realizing it. But her mind was still sharp where it mattered. During one of our porch swing conversations, she told me she'd been to see her lawyer. "I've made arrangements," she said, "for when I'm gone. This house, everything in it, the accounts I've been building for years, it's all going to you." "Nana, don't talk like that." "I'm not being morbid, child. I'm being practical." She patted my hand. "Your father won't protect your interests. That woman and her boy have him twisted around their fingers. So, I'm protecting you myself. The lawyer has everything. When the time comes, he'll make sure you get what's yours." "What about Dad? Won't he be upset that you left everything to me?" She was quiet for a moment, looking out at the fields she'd tended for 60 years. "Your father will get what he deserves," which is to say, not much. He stopped being the son I raised when he stopped being the father you needed. I didn't argue. She wasn't wrong. "Don't tell anyone about this," she added. "Not your daddy, not your mama, not anyone. It's between us and the lawyer. The less people know, the harder it'll be for anyone to interfere. I promised. I kept that promise for the rest of her life. My grandmother died the spring of my senior year of high school. A stroke, sudden and swift, the kind of ending that doesn't give you time to say goodbye. I found out from my mother, who'd heard from a distant cousin, who'd heard from someone at the funeral home. My father hadn't called to tell me. He hadn't called to tell me anything. The funeral was small and strange. My father was there with Gloria and Derek, the three of them clustered together like their own separate family. I stood on the other side of the grave with my mother, feeling like an outsider at the memorial of the woman who'd loved me most. Derek caught my eye during the service and smirked. I didn't know why then. I thought he was just being himself, cruel for cruelty's sake. After the burial, my father approached me for the first time in months. He hugged me stiffly, like he'd forgotten how, and mumbled something about staying in touch. Gloria stood behind him with her hand on his back, steering him away before we could have an actual conversation. "The estate will be handled by Nana's lawyer," he said, as he turned to leave. "There might be some small things for you. Sentimental items. We'll let you know." Small things. Sentimental items. I nodded and didn't think about it again. I was 18, grieving, focused on graduating high school and getting out of a town that had never felt like home. What I didn't know was that my grandmother had left me far more than small things. And what I really didn't know was that my father was lying. I enlisted in the Navy 2 weeks after graduation. It wasn't a decision I made lightly. I'd been thinking about it for years, researching options, talking to recruiters, imagining a life that was structured and purposeful and far away from the chaos of my family. The Navy offered all of that, plus the chance to see the world, to learn skills, to become someone entirely new. My mother cried when I told her, but she understood. "You need to find your own path," she said. "I just wish it wasn't so far away." My father didn't respond to the text I sent informing him. I hadn't expected him to. Boot camp started in July at Great Lakes Naval Station in Illinois. I threw myself into training with everything I had, grateful for the exhaustion that left no room for grief or anger or the complicated feelings I had about the family I was leaving behind. The physical demands were brutal. The mental pressure was relentless, and slowly, deliberately, I was transformed from a lost teenager into something stronger. 3 weeks in, I was called to the administrative building for what they described as a personal matter. I assumed someone had died. My grandfather, maybe, or a distant relative I'd forgotten existed. I steeled myself for bad news as I walked through the door. I wasn't prepared for the news I actually received. The MP officer's name was Lieutenant Commander Reyes. She was patient and thorough, explaining the situation in pieces that took time to assemble into a complete picture. My grandmother's will had been filed with the county court 2 weeks after her death. The lawyer handling the estate, a man named Samuel Whitfield, had attempted to contact me multiple times to discuss my inheritance. He'd called my mother's house, my cell phone, even the mailing address I'd listed on my Navy application. All of his messages had been intercepted. Intercepted by who? I asked. According to Mr. Whitfield, your father and stepbrother claimed to be acting on your behalf. They said you were unreachable due to military training and had given them power of attorney to handle estate matters. I never gave anyone power of attorney. We know. Mr. Whitfield became suspicious when your stepbrother pushed to liquidate assets immediately. He requested verification of the power of attorney document and discovered it was forged. She paused. That's when he contacted us. The folder in my hands felt heavier than paper should feel. I opened it and started reading. My grandmother had left me her farmhouse, the property I'd spent childhood summers running through. She'd left me her car, a practical sedan she'd kept in perfect condition. She'd left me an investment account that had been growing quietly for decades, funded by her late husband's pension and her own careful savings. The total value, according to the estate assessment, was approximately $240,000. Derek had sold the house to a developer for $120,000, well below market value, rushed through closing in less than a week. He'd sold the car to a dealership for $8,000. He'd liquidated the investment account entirely, transferring the funds to an account in his own name. All of this had happened in the 21 days since I'd arrived at boot camp. How is that possible? I asked. Doesn't it take longer to sell a house, to transfer accounts? Normally, yes. But your stepbrother had help. Lieutenant Commander Reyes pulled another document from the folder. Your father co-signed several of the transactions. He claimed to be acting as executor of the estate, even though the will named Mr. Whitfield as executor. My father, of course. He'd stood at my grandmother's grave and told me there might be small things for me, knowing full well that she'd left me everything. He'd helped his stepson steal my inheritance while I was serving my country, unreachable and unaware. What happens now? I asked. Now? Lieutenant Commander Reyes said. We press charges. The investigation moved faster than I expected. Military legal assistance, civilian prosecutors, federal investigators, all of them suddenly interested in my case. Turns out, forging a power of attorney to steal from an active duty service member triggers a whole cascade of legal consequences that Derek and my father hadn't anticipated. Samuel Whitfield, my grandmother's lawyer, became my unexpected ally. He was a soft-spoken man in his 60s who'd handled my grandmother's affairs for over 20 years. He'd known her well, he told me, during our first phone call. He'd known what she wanted. She talked about you often, he said, about how smart you were, how determined. She worried that your father's new family would try to edge you out. That's why she structured the will the way she did. Everything directly to you. No ambiguity, no room for interpretation. But they stole it anyway. They tried. They nearly succeeded. I could hear him shuffling papers on the other end of the line. But your grandmother was a careful woman. She required my involvement in any significant transactions involving her estate. When your stepbrother tried to bypass me, it raised flags. Why didn't anyone call me directly? Why didn't the Navy tell me what was happening? Your father provided a letter claiming you delegated all estate matters to family. He had your signature on it. My signature. Forged. Like the power of attorney. We compared it to your actual signature on file, and it wasn't even close. But the buyer's title company didn't look that carefully. Neither did the bank. Everyone was in a hurry because your stepbrother was pushing to close quickly. The speed had been deliberate, I realized. Derek knew I'd only be unreachable for so long. Boot camp was 8 weeks, and after that, I'd have phone access, email, the ability to discover what had been done. He'd raced to complete the theft before I could resurface. He'd almost made it. Can we get it back? I asked. The house, the money, any of it. The money from the investment account has been frozen. Your stepbrother made the mistake of using a federally insured bank, which means we have leverage. The car is gone, sold to a dealership that resold it immediately. But the house, he paused. The house is more complicated. How complicated? The developer who bought it has already begun demolition. They're planning to subdivide the lot into 3 smaller parcels. Even if we void the sale, the farmhouse itself is gone. Gone. The wraparound porch, the fields I'd run through, the barn where my grandmother had taught me to identify birds by their songs, the fireplace made of river stones, the kitchen with its wood-burning stove, the porch swing where she'd told me stories about our family, about the land, about the generations who'd called that place home. Demolished to make room for 3 identical suburban houses that would sell to people who'd never know what had stood there before. I felt something crack inside my chest. Not break, crack. The kind of damage that doesn't heal cleanly. Samuel gave me a moment. I could hear him waiting on the other end of the line, patient and kind, the way my grandmother had described him. She trusted you, I said finally, to protect her wishes, to make sure I got what she wanted me to have. I tried. I failed, partially, and I'm sorry for that. His voice was heavy with genuine regret. When your father presented that letter, claiming you delegated authority, I should have pushed harder. I should have demanded to speak with you directly. But there are protocols, and he knew the right things to say. And by the time my suspicions solidified into certainty, it was already too late for the house. Yes, but not for everything else. The investment account was the largest asset, and we've recovered that. The proceeds from the house sale are being held in escrow, pending the outcome of the criminal case. And there will be additional restitution. Your stepbrother and father will be required to repay everything they took, plus damages. That won't bring back the house. No, it won't. Samuel sighed. Your grandmother would be furious. She loved that place more than almost anything. But she'd also be proud of you for fighting back, for not letting them get away with it. I haven't fought yet. All I've done is learn what happened. Learning is the first step. The fight comes next, and I'll be beside you for all of it. That's what she would have wanted. We'll pursue full restitution, Samuel said gently. The value of the house, the car, all of it. And there will be criminal charges. What they did wasn't just theft. It was fraud, forgery, and several federal crimes related to your military status. Will they go to prison? If convicted, almost certainly. The federal prosecutors are particularly interested in your case. Stealing from service members during training is something they take very seriously. There are laws specifically designed to protect people like you, people who can't monitor their affairs because they're serving their country. Derek and your father violated several of them. Good. I'll send you updates as the case progresses. In the meantime, focus on your training. Become the sailor your grandmother knew you could be. The legal system will handle the rest. I thanked him and hung up. Then, I sat in the quiet of the administrative building, surrounded by the sounds of boot camp continuing without me, and let myself feel the full weight of what had been taken. My grandmother had tried to give me a future. She'd saved and planned and made careful arrangements to ensure I'd have a foundation to build on. She'd told me about it in secret, trusted me to keep that secret, protected me even in death with documentation designed to prevent exactly what had happened. And in less than a month, my father and stepbrother had destroyed all of it. Not for need, not for desperation, just because they could, just because they saw something that belonged to me and decided it should be theirs. Derek's hungry eyes, my grandmother had said. She'd seen it from the beginning. She'd tried to protect me from it. But some hunger can't be satisfied by warnings. I returned to training that afternoon. There was nothing else to do. The investigation would proceed, with or without my presence, and I had 8 weeks to complete and a career to build. But something had shifted. The exhaustion felt different now, fueled by anger as much as effort. Every push-up, every drill, every shouted command became an act of defiance. They thought I was nothing. They thought I'd never amount to anything. I was going to prove them wrong. The other recruits noticed the change. My rack mate, a woman named Keisha from Georgia, asked me about it one night during the few minutes of quiet before lights out. "You've been different since you came back from admin," she said. "More intense. Did something happen?" I gave her the short version. Family, inheritance, theft. She listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from curiosity to outrage. "And they just took everything while you were here?" "They tried. The lawyer caught it before they could disappear completely." "What are you going to do?" "Finish training, become the best sailor I can be, and then watch them face consequences." Keisha nodded slowly. "Good. Use it. Use the anger. That's what I do." I didn't ask what she was angry about. Everyone in boot camp had something. We were all running from, or running toward, using the military to transform ourselves into people our past selves wouldn't recognize. I intended to transform into someone my grandmother would have been proud of. The federal case proceeded while I completed training. I received updates through official channels, careful, redacted summaries that told me charges had been filed, that Derek and my father had been arrested, that they'd pleaded not guilty and were awaiting trial. My father tried to contact me once, through the Navy's official communication system. His message was short and desperate. "This is all a misunderstanding. Derek made some mistakes, but we were trying to help you. Please call me. Please let me explain." I didn't call. There was nothing to explain. He'd helped forge my signature. He'd lied about being executor. He'd watched his stepson sell my grandmother's house, the house where she'd raised him, and said nothing. Some misunderstandings are actually just betrayals, wearing a thin disguise. Boot camp graduation happened on a crisp September morning. I stood in formation with my company, dressed in whites, feeling the weight of accomplishment settle onto my shoulders. My mother was in the audience, crying happy tears. My grandmother wasn't there, but I felt her anyway. In the sunlight, in the breeze, in the pride that swelled through my chest as they called my name. I'd made it. Despite everything, I'd made it. Afterward, my mother hugged me for a long time. She'd followed the legal case from a distance, horrified by what my father had done, but not entirely surprised. "He changed after the divorce," she said. "Or maybe he was always like that, and I just didn't see it. Gloria brought out the worst in him. It doesn't matter now. What matters is what happens next." "And what happens next?" "Justice," I said. "That's what happens next." The trial took place 7 months after my grandmother's death. I attended in my Navy dress uniform, sitting in the front row of the gallery, making sure Derek and my father could see exactly who they'd tried to steal from. Derek's lawyer argued that he genuinely believed he had permission to act on my behalf. He painted a picture of a confused young man trying to help his stepsister manage complicated financial matters while she was unavailable. The forged documents were mistakes. The rushed sales were poor judgment. The whole thing was just a family dispute that had been blown out of proportion. The prosecutor dismantled each argument systematically. The forged power of attorney didn't match my handwriting, my signature, or any document I'd ever signed. Derek had never contacted me directly, not once, to discuss estate matters. The letter claiming I'd delegated authority was fabricated entirely, written on a computer, imprinted with a forged signature, copied from an old birthday card Derek had found in my grandmother's house. The birthday card detail made me sick. He'd gone through her belongings, found something I'd made as a child, and used it to steal from me. The violation felt almost worse than the theft itself. My father's defense was even weaker. He claimed he'd trusted Derek to handle things appropriately, that he hadn't known about the forgeries, that he'd just signed what his stepson put in front of him. But the emails told a different story. Prosecutors had obtained records showing my father and Derek discussing the plan weeks before my grandmother died. They'd researched boot camp schedules, calculated how long I'd be unreachable, strategized about which assets to liquidate first. The theft wasn't opportunistic. It was premeditated. My father wouldn't look at me during the trial. He sat at the defense table with his shoulders hunched, staring at his hands, radiating the kind of shame that comes too late to matter. Gloria sat behind him in the gallery, her face a mask of righteous indignation, convinced to the end that her son was being persecuted. Derek looked at me, though, several times. His expression was hard to read. Defiance, maybe, or resentment. He still didn't think he'd done anything wrong. He'd seen something he wanted and taken it. The way he'd taken my father's attention, my grandmother's house, my peace of mind. In his world, that was just how things worked. The jury disagreed, guilty on all counts: fraud, forgery, theft, and several charges specific to crimes against service members. Derek was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison. My father, as an accomplice, received 3 years plus 5 years of probation. I watched them being led away in handcuffs. Derek's face finally showed something real. Fear, disbelief, the dawning understanding that his actions had consequences he'd never anticipated. My father just looked broken, a man who'd lost everything because he'd chosen the wrong family to protect. Gloria screamed at me as I left the courthouse, called me names, threatened lawsuits, promised revenge. I walked past her without responding. She wasn't worth the energy. Restitution took longer than the trial. The frozen investment funds were returned to me, minus legal fees and court costs. Derek's assets, what little he had, were seized and liquidated. My father's retirement account was garnished. The proceeds from the rushed house sale, which had been held in escrow during the criminal proceedings, were awarded to me as part of the restitution order. The developer who'd bought the farmhouse was furious. He'd demolished a century-old structure, invested in subdivision permits and infrastructure, and now faced the possibility of legal challenges to his ownership. His lawyers threatened to sue Derek for fraudulent sale, which would have been amusing if the house hadn't already been gone. You can't undemolish history. In the end, I recovered about 70% of what my grandmother had left me. The full value of the investment account, most of the house proceeds, and a judgment against Derek and my father for the remainder that would follow them for the rest of their lives. Wage garnishments, tax refund seizures, the kind of financial consequences that make it impossible to build anything without me getting a piece of it. The money was real and substantial, enough for a down payment on my own home someday, enough for education, for investments, for the foundation my grandmother had wanted me to have. I'd lost the farmhouse, but I hadn't lost everything. Samuel helped me set up accounts similar to the ones my grandmother had maintained. Careful, diversified, designed for long-term growth rather than quick returns. He also helped me draft my own will at 20 years old because I'd learned that the future isn't guaranteed and preparation matters. Your grandmother taught me that, I told him during one of our planning sessions. She said, the only thing no one can take is what you know. But she also made sure to document everything, to protect herself legally, to leave paper trails that couldn't be erased. She was a wise woman. I wish she'd had more time. Me too. I used some of the recovered money to buy a small plot of land near where the farmhouse had stood. The developer had subdivided the property, but one corner remained undeveloped. Too small for their plans, too awkward to build on. It was the corner where my grandmother's garden had been, where she'd grown tomatoes and beans and sunflowers every summer for as long as anyone could remember. The developer was happy to sell it. He probably thought I was being sentimental, and he was right. But sentiment has value too. I planted a garden there. Tomatoes, beans, sunflowers. The things my grandmother used to grow, in the same soil she'd tended for 60 years. I built a small bench near the center, facing east toward where the farmhouse porch used to be. And I had a plaque made for Nana, who taught me that land holds us, even when everything else is gone. It's not the same as having the house. Nothing could be the same. But it's something, a connection to the land she loved, to the summers I spent there, to the woman who saw something in me worth protecting. I visit when I can, which isn't often given my Navy schedule, but I know it's there. I know the sunflowers still bloom every August because I pay a local farmer to maintain the garden in my absence. I know that if I ever need to touch the past, to remember where I came from, I have a place to go. My grandmother would have liked that. She would have understood. I still serve. I've been promoted twice, stationed on ships that carry me to places my grandmother only read about in books. I send her postcards in my mind. Stories about the ports I visit, the people I meet, the person I've become. I tell her about the garden, about how the tomatoes came in strong this year, about how someone left flowers on the bench, and I still don't know who. Derek will be in prison for another 3 years. My father got out early on parole, but the terms of his release include continued restitution payments and no contact with me unless I initiate it. I haven't initiated it. I don't plan to. Gloria tried to reach out once, through a mutual acquaintance. She wanted me to know that my father was suffering, that the conviction had destroyed him, that I should consider forgiveness for the sake of family. I didn't respond. There's nothing to forgive. They made choices, and those choices had consequences. That's not cruelty. That's justice. There's a difference. I think she'd be proud. I think she knew I'd survive whatever came my way. That's why she left me what she did. Not just money and property, but the knowledge that someone believed in me enough to plan for my future. Derek's hungry eyes couldn't take that. No one can. If you're listening to this and something resonated, if you've ever been robbed by the people who should have protected you, if you've ever had to fight for what was rightfully yours, I want you to know this. Justice doesn't always come quickly, but it comes. Documentation matters. Honest lawyers matter. And the people who think they can steal from you while your back is turned often underestimate how thoroughly their crimes can be traced. My stepbrother thought I was unreachable. He thought boot camp meant silence, meant invisibility, meant he could take what he wanted without consequences. He forgot that paper trails exist. He forgot that lawyers notice inconsistencies. He forgot that the military takes care of its own. I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever discovered family members trying to steal what was rightfully yours? Did you fight back? Leave a comment below and tell me where you're listening from. We share stories like this every day here at Her Service. Her Story. Stories about inheritance, betrayal, and the power of persistence when people try to take what you've earned. If you don't want to miss the next one, subscribe and stay with us. Let's keep walking this path together.